Going live, baby.
Now?
Yep. Got a minute left, thankfully.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Turn this music down so we don't get sued for copyright infringement.
Hey, can you plug me in?
Where are you?
Alright. Share.
Ready to turn your volumes off.
Did it. Oh, look at that little chat window.
It's so tiny. It'll fit right there.
Hooray.
Hooray, we're doing it. And we're not going to do any music in the background today.
Right.
All right.
Weaning ourselves.
You guys are making this all possible. Looks so bright.
Anarchy. Well, it's bright.
The video is just super blown out because of the scratches on my lens.
Aha. Ambient effect.
Ooh, we're doing our best.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave the door open for Dave.
KBMF is generously supported by Collective Elevation Butte, offering natural medicine for anxiety, pain, and sleep at 34 East Galena Street. Collective Elevation also offers weekly doctor appointments. They're open 7 days a week, 11 to 7 weekdays, and 11 to 5 on weekends. For more information, find Collective Elevation on Facebook or by phone at 565-5850.
Thank you so much to the Noracle for that lovely show this afternoon. It's good to have you back on America's Most Radio. Songs of love and horror every Sunday from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
We're all volunteers here. If you would also like to be a volunteer on KBMF and spin the music that you love for the town that you love, or maybe people you love far and wide, you can check out our website, butteamericaradio.org, and find out when our next DJ training is going to be. It's usually once a month in the evenings, and it's free. And oops, I'm not allowed to say it's free. But anyway, you're just a volunteer. It's a DJ training.
We can say.
You can't say things are free.
I think in relation to the station, we can.
Oh, really?
Like we could say, we can quantify and qualify station stuff.
Okay.
That's what I understand.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Yeah,
it's a
anyway.
volunteer. It's redundant to say, hey, volunteering is free.
Right.
But all of us are volunteers here, except for a couple of minimally paid staff members, and we make radio for our town, and you can too if you like what the Noracle does or what we do, or you hate it and you want to do something different. Try DJ training maybe. And as for today.
What's happening right now?
Right now,
Who are you?
I'm Red-Handed Jill, also known as Ainsley Sevier, and this is Post-Orthodoxy.
I'm Citizen DJ Dark Sevier.
Just that's what you're known as. That's
Yeah.
it. You have a cool enough name that I mean, like I have a pretty cool name now too,
Yeah.
but you you have a cool enough name that you can just your DJ name is just your name.
Right.
That's cool. And
Right.
this is Post-Orthodoxy.
Yes, it is.
A show about changing our minds.
Hmm.
We have a variety of equipments and things to set up before our radio show every day because we're trying to broaden our audience and reach more people with the conversation and have a broader conversation with more people.
Right.
And so you can be listening of any number of ways. You can be listening 102.5 FM.
Terrestrially.
As you like to say, on the literal planet.
On the planet.
In a literal radio.
Yeah.
Real radio.
Yeah.
Or you could be listening at butteamericaradio.org/stream.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, anywhere in the world. Easy to listen to on Wi-Fi or phone data. Quality radio made by real people. Or you could be joining us in one of our video live streams today. And you're going to have to forgive me. I'm using some old equipment. My phone camera lens is pretty scratched, but the effect is still there. It's going to be myself, Dark Sevier, and our special guest later on, Dave Hutchins, talking about Anarchy, and you can participate on Facebook, on Twitch, or on YouTube
Wow.
with your comments.
There's options.
There are options, whatever platform you prefer.
We're not taking phone calls though. So it's all typey questions.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Right. We can't take phone calls, unfortunately.
No, we're not doing that.
We have
we're not doing that this week.
We're gonna figure out how to take phone calls with a phone that will enable our online audiences to hear the phone calls as well. If you are a person, and I'll repeat this later on, if you're a person that would like, that's listening maybe on a real live radio and doesn't have social media and would like to
Get involved with the dialogue.
right.
Come knock on the window, we'll let you in.
Or you can email me at redhandedjill03@gmail.com.
Today's show.
Today's show is about anarchy. Well, I mean, what's Post-Orthodoxy about in general? Dave's going to get here at 4:30.
4:30. We have a number. Well, the show is about what happens, the phenomena around experiences of folks when orthodoxies are challenged or broken.
Mm-hmm.
When your view of the world suddenly you think is the view of the world becomes just another view of the world, and there's other ones going on that you've suddenly encountered
Right.
that you can no longer deny. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah. We have an Instagram now.
Yeah.
I'm excited because
Post-Orthodoxy Instagram.
I have these little conversations in my head all the time that I would love to have with people, but you can't just like, hey, so-and-so, come over for coffee right now so we can discuss this interesting thing that I'm wondering about.
Right.
And so I think that we can have conversations through the Instagram story where I did this experiment once over Thanksgiving with some family drama I was dealing with, and people were interacting and sending messages, and I think it's a great way to start a conversation about maybe like for instance, what was I thinking about? We were talking about wage inequality, and I was just like, not everybody knows all the things. I don't know all the things, and I'm always learning all the things.
I also don't know all the things.
And there are a lot of other people out there who are maybe not having a very good time because they are laboring under certain brainwashing about wage inequality, and they think they're probably middle class and that they're trying really hard, and if you try harder you'll make more money and have a better time. And that's just not really the case, unfortunately, anymore with the income inequality difference between minimum wage and what it costs to like rent a basic apartment
To live in the world.
to live in the world. It doesn't match up anymore. Yeah, that's it. I'm hoping our Instagram at Post-Orthodoxy we can start having more of those conversations,
right.
and it won't just be
Ongoing.
me ranting personally on my personal Instagram.
Right.
I'm following a lot of really amazing podcasts. A lot of people who, like myself, have gone post-evangelical Christian or have experienced religious trauma of some kind and are moving outside of those circles and trying to find their way. And everybody's on different stages of the journey. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
One lady that I've been networking with on Instagram is going through the grief of her husband dying suddenly in a car accident, and then 6 months later finding out that he was cheating on her.
Oh, after he died.
Yeah.
That's wow. You have to go back
Double
retroactively
grief.
and grieve the grieving that you did
Right.
without all the information.
Right.
That's
And her
a
church, she feels like her church just isn't supporting her at all.
Right.
You know, they're just talking about in her church anyway, so that's great. So
Yeah.
she's like, I want to think that there's something better out there, but it's so scary because my church has taught me that the world is scary and bad. But my church isn't helping me feel any better either in this trying time. And I would agree with her that evangelical Christianity doesn't really know how to handle adultery very well or very healthfully. A lot, especially when it's male adultery. When it's female adultery, she just messed up. A lot of times,
Just say no.
when it's male adultery, the wife was probably not serving him properly.
Yeah, just say no.
That's the message.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but then there are also other people like Dirty Rotten Church Kids is another account on Instagram I'm following with our new Post-Orthodoxy Instagram.
Okay.
And Dirty Rotten Church Kids is these two. I think they're both still pastors, but they've just moved so far beyond fundamental evangelical Christianity that they're going back and calling out all the crap about
From the inside.
From the inside, they're like,
Okay.
we used to think that way, and now we can see how inconsistent it is and how hurtful it is. and they're using Bible verses to contradict Bible verses that evangelical Christians use to hurt people.
Right.
So it's very,
good.
very interesting.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it is. But the whole show and all of our online presence, our goal in life is to try to help people have a better time.
Yeah, we should. I sort of hit the limit personally with political discourse.
What does that mean?
The current political discourse. Like, I feel like we're.
You've hit the limit with you don't want to participate in U.S. politics anymore?
It's not that I don't want to participate. I feel like the level of the conversation has gotten so bad.
Okay.
That it doesn't seem productive anymore. And so the last few weeks I've been saying basically on air that I think we're having these political discussions based on the idea that we live in a democracy, which I find really fascinating because we're not a democracy.
Well, the U.S. was never a democracy.
Right. So we used to be a democratic republic,
right,
which was a democracy with representatives in between you and what happens. And we're not that anymore, really. On local level, maybe more so, but on the national level, not so much. According to President Jimmy Carter, we are no longer we are living in an oligarchy with unlimited political unlimited bribery.
Right.
So
that's
where we are
I see
now.
That personally.
Right. So if we're having a discussion about politics and that isn't somewhere
perception
in the equation, it feels like the conversation's a little moot for me. So I'm sort of zooming out a little bit, and this is just my personal thing. Some people, it's like sports. Some people love to go cheer the team on, I want my guy to win, or I want my lady to win, and it feels good to be that thing. And I know it feels good for me to do that thing, but I'm trying to figure out if it's really that productive. So I've decided to sort of zoom out and start looking at maybe the way that we're operating as a society. What basis are we operating out of? Like philosophically, socially, what is the premise? And so last week I started talking a little bit about the meta-modernism, which is something that's a bone I'm chewing on right now, trying to get my head wrapped around that sort of social philosophy.
And meta-modernism is a follow-up of postmodernism, which is a follow-up of modernism, blah, 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 right?
So the idea, I like the idea because it's an emergent, it's talking about people individually co-creating society as we speak. So no longer are we waiting for society to change or going out in mass in the streets and protesting to make change, but doing it at every moment by being a different society, by acting differently.
Well, and I think one of the key things that you brought up that we're sort of trying to, you encounter a new concept and you're like, I have read the dictionary definition of this new concept. And then you'd be like, I need to read that again. I don't know. You can know what it means without knowing what it means. And one of the key things that we're getting to know about metamodernism is rather than thinking of yourself as just floating around and society as its own entity that's happening to you, or that you experience society or you experience your country's culture, to begin to think of yourself as a piece of. The society would not exist without the humans. You are a part of society and shaping it by the things that you believe or the things that you carry around with you.
So I started talking about that a little bit last week, and I want to maybe, if we have time at the end of the show, throw out a couple other bones from that book. And also, if you're not familiar with meta-modernism, and you do have a Facebook page, you can follow Hansi Freinacht.
Hansi Freinacht is posting all the great articles about this topic.
So he's doing regular discussions on there. Anyway, I sent him a message, and
he wrote back
in Sweden, and he's agreed to be interviewed for the Post-Orthodoxy show coming up in March. So sometime before the end of the month, I imagine we'll have the interview and have it recorded and then air it during this time slot.
Wow.
That's the plan. Anyway.
Well, yeah, we have an interview lined up with Hansi Freinacht himself, philosopher from that region of Europe.
Yes. Author of the book Nordic Ideology and The Listening Society.
Kind of one of the instigators of metamodernism.
Yes. So if you're interested to get a little background on an upcoming guest, Hansi Freinacht on Facebook is a way to sort of go down the rabbit hole, because there's a lot there. There's a lot of threads.
A lot of rabbit hole.
Yeah. Also, we have another letter from our foreign correspondent, our global partner.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun.
Lope,
Yes.
Giving us his impressions of last week's show. I'm glad that he's contributing on a weekly basis.
And so last
Taking
week's
the time and
show
effort,
was us responding to what we perceived as a very unhelpful and in some ways dangerous set of advice given to Bushans by a neuroscientist about depression and suicide.
Yeah, so we'll read that at some point.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
And then in the next 15 minutes or so, our guest will be here.
So leading up to that, as I was starting our new Instagram account, it's always fun when you start them and then it's really angsty when you have to try to maintain them.
Yeah.
But for right now, I'm in the fun phase, and I was like, what should our first post be? And like, what should all of our posts be? Some
Yes.
accounts are just text, thoughtful quotes that somebody has come up with. Other accounts reshare maybe tweets or memes, and then have a long intellectual discussion about that tweet or meme,
right?
With the photo, So it's you can do a variety of things. But I just put up dictionary definitions of orthodox and orthodoxy,
right?
Because our show name is intended to invoke curiosity and learning. All of which are important if we're going to move beyond reality bubbles and learn to respect each other's perspectives more in the world and have better time. And I posted orthodox, the definition. A person or their views can be orthodox, especially religious or political views or other beliefs or practices. Orthodox can mean conforming to what is generally or traditionally accepted as right or true, established and approved, fundamentalist, conventional. So it sort of sounds sort of positive and sort of like, wait, I don't want to be called those things.
Right.
And so that's just the dictionary definition. For us, orthodoxy is just, to be very blunt, being stuck in your ways about something, whether you know you're stuck or not.
Your perception is locked in.
You think that's the only way things are.
Particular reality. Or way of being.
Stuck in your mentality.
Right.
And so our friend Dickie commented with this thoughtful comment that I thought we could chew on briefly before Dave gets here and we discuss anarchy.
All right.
Most of us think a pine tree is a pine tree because we have been taught that it is. What have we learned based on our own experiences? Maybe something about ourselves. So sort of this whole ponderous thought that he put out there. I think I love putting out miniature challenges. Like 1 week I challenged everybody to try sleeping on their left side, because that's the way that your intestines and stomach are rotating. That's the path of your digestion in your body is towards the left.
Okay.
And I always find that I feel better digestionally when I sleep on my left side. Another thing that I challenge people to do was to try to drink more water, Or you can challenge people to start saying the U.S. instead of America, since there are 23 countries in America.
Right.
U.S. is just one of them. And so it sounds like Dickie has issued what could be a really great personal development challenge. What is knowledge in your head, or in what knowledge do you have that you have learned because you experienced it and decided that you now know something from that experience, as opposed to what knowledge do you have that is just because other people have told you it's that way?
Right, there's a difference between knowledge and belief.
Yeah.
Like, you believe something to be true because you accept it as so based on someone else's authority. Knowledge is something that you've had some direct experience.
And you have a really great metaphor that you bring up.
Which one's that?
France.
Oh yeah, right. I believe France is there. I don't know France is there.
Right, and that's a difference.
I believe it because if the idea of France is a total hoax and it's not there, I find that kind of spectacular.
it would be a very large and wondrous hoax.
Right. So I believe France is there, but I don't know France is there because
Huh.
I've never been there.
Interesting.
So I think when we perceive things in the world, there's things that we accept as the beliefs that we have, that we act as though it is our knowledge. And I think that's where we end up.
As though
getting
you
some-
know it for yourself.
Right. And belief is very different than knowledge.
Yeah. So that's a challenge when you.
That's where I go off of Dickie Nelson's comment.
Yeah. When you find yourself spouting something out this week, which we all do, we're like, oh, and I will blurt out this fact. Is it a fact that you've experienced for yourself, or just something that someone told you? I would guess the pie chart breaks down into a very, very, very large section of the pie is things that you know because other people have told you.
You don't know it. You believe it because other
Right.
people told you.
Right.
Ideas that you hold because somebody else has given them to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a direct. If it's not a direct experience,
Then it is not dictionary definition
It's not knowledge.
Would you
Right.
mind flipping that light switch on behind you? I'm experimenting with trying to make our video a little less washed out.
Sure.
Another thing that I wanted to give a shout out to this week is we had a fan of ours approached us in the bar last night, and it's always really lovely when people come up to us and say, hey, I listened to your radio show.
Yeah.
Because we have some people that will regularly comment, lovers of the show and love to haters of the show.
Mm-hmm.
It was my term, love to haters.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's all just haters.
No.
There's a certain kind of interaction that people are used to, and that's challenging everything you say.
Right.
And so we really appreciate people that interact regularly with the show, because it prompts valuable and useful and productive conversations. But it's also really lovely when we're out about town and somebody's like, oh, I listen to your radio show, I don't say stuff,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And this person, a middle-aged dude,
Yeah.
middle-aged white dude,
Yeah.
for demographical considerations, said that he enjoyed it because he didn't agree with everything we said.
Well, he said it was about 50-50.
Yeah.
He says, I don't know if I'm on board with all the things you say. I'm like, I don't know if I am either. That's the point. Is we're throwing it out there and totally willing to have a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he expressed that it was, I guess the 50% was enough to
Yeah.
make him want to come back and listen again.
Well, I think that's really a win because most people find not agreeing with something unenjoyable, or they find new knowledge to be scary.
You're being challenged right now online.
I know. I'm sort of half and half.
Jerry Lee challenging your statement.
America refers to this country. The Americas refers to the countries in the rest of the North and South continents. I'm really curious, when did the U.S. start getting called America? Because it hasn't always been called America.
No,
It's
it
the
was always
United States of America.
Yeah.
It hasn't always been called America. America is a colloquialism.
Yeah, I think it only came out in like the 50s or
We've
something.
taken the term and caused it to mean something that it did not originally mean. And that's a colloquialism. Much like the OK Boomer phrase is not only referring to people who are literally of the Boomer generation. The OK Boomer phrase has become to mean an interaction between any younger person and any older person where they are dissing each other in some way. It doesn't have to be literally people from the Boomer generation, the baby boom generation.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm going to need to do some research to back up my opinion, but my opinion
Americas
still stands
versus America.
that the United States was always the United States, and then for some reason at some point we started calling it America at the exclusion of the other 22 countries in America, North America or South America.
It's a cause you've taken up.
Yeah, and Mokai, our foreign correspondent Mokai, was the one that brought that to my attention, really.
Speaking of Mokai, do you want to save that for the end of the show, or do you want to do it before we get to our
I don't know.
guest?
How much did he write for us today?
I don't know. I haven't opened it up. Let me see.
Dr. Dave is in the house.
How's the microphone over there? Is that working?
Yep.
How's
Sounds
your,
good.
How's your
Very good.
headphones?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. And you brought notes. I'm so excited. I purposefully didn't look up Anarchy at all because I want to provide a really raw perspective.
Oh, good, yeah.
Dark's been
Right.
reading all day.
No, I just kept going sideways. I would look at the definition of anarchy, and then I
Yeah.
would start thinking about game theory. Then I would start thinking about metamodernism, and then I started finding new stuff about game theory that I didn't. And anyway, so I've also like I didn't cheat and look at what the authorities say anarchy is, except for the first thing that comes up on Google.
That's about as far as I got too.
Oh, really?
I jotted down.
I was relying on you to have all the.
Well, I mean, we're coming, in my mind, I'm hoping to hear Dave's personal perspective on Anarchy because it's
Right.
it's his held belief.
Okay.
And just because the dictionary definition of America is 2 continents with 23 countries doesn't mean that that's necessarily what other people think that the definition of America is.
Quite true.
Same-
and I
same thing with
experienced that
anarchy.
in South America. They were like, "What do you mean you're American? We're all American."
Yeah, that's not telling me much, bro. Hey, I'm a human.
Do you mind if we do Mokai's thing?
Yeah.
Before we get to
Yeah.
the anarchy thing? So, our global partner, Mokai Malope, has chimed in to give his feedback on last week's show. Hi, friends on the cooler side of the planet.
Cooler as
no,
in...
actually colder. He said colder. I was curious about the doctor who gave the suicide lecture at Tech said about church attendance being a measure to prevent suicide. I looked at countries that have high suicide rates, such as Guyana and Lesotho. Guyana and Lesotho and the state of Montana all have suicide rates that are above 20 per 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
The one
I think
thing
Montana right now is 28 per 100,000.
The one thing all places have in common is the high altitude. I'm not sure if I missed it on the show, but did the doctor mention any physical measures a person could do to minimize the effects of high altitude? Any supplements or food people can eat as part of their diet, or things people living in high altitude areas could avoid? Guyana and Lesotho, like Montana, have very low population density per square kilometer. Bahamas has a low population density that has one of the lowest suicide rates in the world. Maybe at sea level, can live far apart and not be at a higher risk of suicide. Guyana and Lesotho have a very low income per capita compared to Montana. The Bahamas have a lower income per capita than Montana. So it's possible that income level might not be a major cause of suicide. Guns in Lesotho are strictly controlled, so maybe even easy access to weapons might not be the only reason to a high suicide rate. Lesotho and Guyana are both majority Christian, so it's confusing a bit how church plays a role in preventing suicide. Only 0.08 of the population in Maldives are Christian, but their suicide rate is smaller than that of Romania, which is 98% Christian. Nigeria has a reported 88% church attendance from its Christian population, while Latvia has attendance of 6% of their Christian population, and both countries have about 17 suicides per 100,000 reported. From what I observe, high altitude is a big cause of suicide. Many medical experts came up with some form of medication to help counter the effects of high altitude. Maybe we should start talking about suicide more as a medical problem than a social problem. To make it seems that medicine could solve part of the problem. We don't talk of other medical conditions as if it's a social problem. Religion, or how often you go to church, to me does not look like a factor at all. I know it is a combination of factors that cause suicide, but I think each factor can be dealt with separately. I would start with the altitude factor. These stats are from Wikipedia, which might not be very reliable, but I'm not a doctor, so my opinion is not very reliable either. I think we did mention last week that Montana is what they call in the suicide belt.
Right.
So all along the Rockies, there's
High altitude,
abnormally high
low
suicide rates.
vitamin D absorption, low oxygen.
Those are factors. Yeah, the doctor did not seem to mention our particular condition. And his religious data was cooked. We looked it up, and it wasn't people who go to church. He said people who go to church, but actually what the report was saying was that women between 30 and 55 were not had an exceptionally low suicide rate,
And
which
also
they
went to
do,
church.
whether they go to church or not.
Yeah.
It is the lowest group of,
In the US.
of people who are likely to commit suicide. So he took that data and then said people who go to church, which I found disingenuous.
Right, that was kind of, we were already a
The
little
kindest way I
frustrated,
could say it. Yeah.
but that was kind of the meow,
So
loss of trust.
thanks for listening to the show last week, Mokai, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate the feedback and the information.
So it sounds like he pulled up some impactful correlatory data
Yeah.
between altitudes
Yes.
and suicide rates.
Yeah, this guy just had a canned speech. He was telling us to go outside and have our lunch
It wasn't
More
tailored
often
to the location for sure.
to avoid depression, and
Yeah.
he lives in Palo Alto. He didn't know where he was, I don't think.
Yeah.
He did not prepare for this audience. Anyway, that was last week's show.
Yeah,
This week's show, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while.
we've been teasing Anarchy.
The idea of talking about anarchy has been something I've been interested in relation to the show, because I think the idea of being post-Orthodox, I think we often will have an Orthodox view of something that, unless it is challenged, we maintain. So
You don't think that it's not the right thing. You have no reason. You don't know what you don't know.
right. So
Like, I know that I know things about riding horses. I know that I don't know things about building rockets. But then there's a whole part of the pie chart that I don't know because I don't know it exists to know that I don't know anything about it. Yes.
So I looked up dictionary in the dictionary there, anarchy, and I want to read what the dictionary says because it has two definitions.
Okay.
Two main ones. The first one is a state of disorder due to absence or non-recognition of authority, which sounds like our current state of affairs. The other definition was absence of government and absolute freedom of the individual regarded as a political ideal.
Let's try that one more time.
Yeah, we'll do that again. Absence of government and absolute freedom of the individual regarded as a political ideal.
It would be ideal if each individual had absolute freedom.
Absolute freedom and nobody to tell him no.
Sounds dangerous.
Well, it does to a certain perspective.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us what your understanding of anarchy is?
Sure, yeah. I guess I would preface it by saying I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, not even particularly well read on anarchy, but I do have some of my own sort of deeply held beliefs about it. So, and for me, I guess that second definition you read there sort of fits into it, but really just touches on it because it's deeper than that. And it has to do with some of those orthodoxies, and in this case, some that have been held for maybe even hundreds of generations. So some deeply held human orthodoxy about power structures. And to me, anarchy is about reimagining our human experiment without hierarchy.
Right.
And it breaks down to that.
And what's your definition of hierarchy?
An unequal power structure when one person or group has power over another.
And I guess my role is mostly just going to be devil's advocate, and I don't mean it's not really devil's advocate; it's more just like ignorance advocate.
So what is your
I'm just thinking through you saying those things, and I'm trying to really think about how I feel about what you said. And so wanting to know what you think about hierarchy is one thing. You're like, people shouldn't have power over other people. Coming out of a super fundamentalist hierarchical structure where it goes like God, daddy, children, or maybe God, pastor, daddy, children. I have this little thing that pops up in the back of my mind that's like, but somebody needs to be in charge. Otherwise, how will we be safe? Is sort of this
that's the knee jerk
gut hindbrain feeling. And I talk on the show all the time about how there is a nature or nurture or some of both perspective of wanting to know who's in charge and what the rules are, and that we can move beyond needing that to feel safe. And I'm still shedding some of it, obviously, because you say there shouldn't be a hierarchy, and I say, then how do we know what the rules are? and that my hindbrain doesn't feel safe.
Sure, that's understandable in the first reaction, and I think it can be hard to separate the symptoms of our current society from just general problems that we would have to face, because I think a lot of them are addressed through this organizational structure. But as far as the rules, I don't think, rules might not be the best word, but anarchy doesn't necessarily preclude agreements. Like,
Okay.
we won't kill each other. Things
So
like
like
this.
hyper-democratic agreements.
Direct democracy is a core piece of it.
Direct, so...
wait, and before you go further, can I ask you,
Yes.
what is your impression of anarchy without having done any research,
Right.
and just the cultural hearing that you've done of it, where people say anarchy in one context or another?
Bing,
What
bing,
comes,
bing, bing, bing.
yeah, what comes to mind for you
Well,
when you hear the word anarchy?
Right, I specifically didn't look it up, and I posted on our new Post-Orthodoxy Instagram today. I was like, without Googling, what is your impression of anarchy? You know?
Okay.
And so for me, it's a little hard. I have to go back a couple years because I've been kind of pondering it since I met you, basically. Like, what is this thing? And this nice person likes it, but I thought nice people didn't like anarchy, you know? So let's see. Anarchy, it makes me think of, at the end of the very first Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, the police chief comes in and he's like, people are saying the bad guy has risen from the dead. And Sherlock Holmes is like, well, what's going on then about it? And he's like, oh, sheer bloody panic, sir. You know, and so when people say anarchy, I kind of think of this police officer like saying, panic, sir, sheer bloody panic. You know, I'm sorry for my British friends who for whom that is a horrible swear word. This is American radio. I mean U.S. radio.
It's global radio. You need to get with the program.
Oh, great. I'm going to have to research swear words in other languages so I don't use them. Yeah, just kind of that idea that anarchy means chaos in the streets. Nobody knows what's going on. People don't feel safe because they don't know what their neighbor's up to. Anarchy means no trash service. Anarchy means people just don't show up for work when they don't feel like it because they just do whatever they want. Like, these are sort of the impressions of anarchy. Anarchy is your mom leaves you home to babysit and you had 2 jobs, dinner and go to bed, and she comes home and the house is a mess and things are burning in the oven and everybody's running around naked. You know, because like you tried to get them in the bath and they refused, and they're just running around the house in like, I won't get in the bathtub. That's anarchy.
Okay, in your
yeah, those are my
past readings
impressions without ever having Googled it.
And I'm very familiar with those sort of impressions. Those were my impressions until I started to learn more.
Why did you want to learn more about that thing? You were like, this looks horrible. I should learn more about it.
I came to it through labor organizing. And anarchists that were labor organizers.
That feels really ironic to me. I'm so excited to be learning, my mind is literally like, right now. Like, labor unions and anarchism.
Yes. Strong tie there, strong tie in Butte, going back, almost exactly 100 years.
Of anarchy.
Of anarchist organizers.
Philosophy, anarchist philosophy. Would you call it philosophy?
Sure, yeah, or ideology, yeah.
Ethos?
Yeah.
Huh.
Deeper than politics, I think.
Deeper than politics,
Yeah.
right?
Right, it's not just a political structure.
No, I think it opposes all those hierarchies, religious, class, societal.
I feel, in my observance of you thinking, it was basically like, oh, I met Dave, and I found out Dave was an anarchist, and then I'm kind of like watching Dave for the past 2 years, like, so this is what an anarchist is like. I wonder what he feels about this thing, And to me, it seemed, going through kind of some trying social things over the last couple of years, it's helped you almost remove yourself from being as stressed about social upheaval as someone who is not an anarchist.
Or somebody who's invested in the structure that's being challenged right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt like maybe that's how Dave is feeling so calm about everything.
I think that's a powerful piece of this ideology, is that it's scalable from just your and I's interaction we can make an agreement of a
to
sort
be
of
anarchist,
yeah, power relation, which is equal.
Okay.
And then it scales all the way up to, potentially all of humanity.
So is anarchy true equality? And is true equality therefore anarchy? Are they synonymous?
Equalities, we'd have to define that further and
Right.
talk about what that means. I think equity, yes.
Oh gosh.
Hmm.
Okay, what's the difference between equality and equity?
Well,
Equity
it's
is like
nuanced too, but
financial
it's
capital.
no, different kind of equity.
Oh.
We're talking about
Equate, right?
equal opportunity.
Equity is equal opportunity, and equality is being treated equally,
Right, like
having equal value
I
as a
mean,
person.
yeah, because we come from different places. So if you get a speeding ticket and Bezos gets a speeding ticket
Right.
for $100, that's not equity, right? That doesn't. There's a difference there from.
It means nothing to Bezos. He could get speeding tickets all day.
Right, and just pay
there's
him.
there's no reason for him.
Huh. I'm looking at the internet. Everydayfeminism.com says equality is treating everybody the same. Equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. Equality aims to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same kind of help. Interesting. So equality is treating everybody equally, but equity is actually helping people to achieve being truly equal.
Sure, I can go with that.
Wealth redistribution
What?
would be an example of equity.
Oh, now I can just see alarms going off in people's heads. I can see the ire rising.
I mean, I would go farther than wealth and abolish property. So.
Okay,
Right.
Mr. Anarchist. How would that work as an example? We're gonna zoom in, we're gonna zoom out, we're gonna zoom in, we're gonna zoom out, and poke the beastie from all angles. What's an example of, what do you mean abolish property?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess if you want a practical example, how we would implement that right now, that's tough because these sort of fundamental changes can't happen.
I know, so many changes would have to happen. But if you were to write a short story,
can I give
that
an
was like
example?
a slice of life.
Please.
Yeah.
So when I was in South Africa, visiting South Africa, I was asking Coquello, I said, so if I wanted to move to Zululand, how much is property? And he's like, you can't buy it. I was like, okay, well, if I wanted to build a house, what do I do? And he said, well, you get a 12-pack and maybe a bottle of brandy, and you go to the village heads. And you say, hey, I want to build a thing over there. And then you guys socialize for a little bit. They figure out if you're a jerk or not, and whether or not they want you over there. And if all that works out, then you build a place. And then that's yours as long as you're there doing the thing.
But you don't own the land that your house is on.
And that's not even a concept. It's interesting to live in a place where that's not a concept.
Of owning land.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of those orthodoxies that we take for granted. Private property is something that's, part of most societies right now, and hard to imagine it without. But I think, and this is just me guessing, there was, 10,000 years of humanity before modern civilization where there was no such thing as private property.
Right.
It was hunter-gatherer type thing. And so there's probably a lot more of humanity before this concept of private property came into.
As far as linear time.
Yeah.
So, I had a thought, I lost it. What's an example of how could we be anarchist friends?
Well,
to bring it down to the micro level.
Yeah.
I would start with the idea of consensus, that you and I are gonna agree to operate on consensus.
Okay.
All the decisions that affect the both of us, we're going to make an agreement that it's only by consensus. I can't decide something that goes against your wants and needs, and vice versa.
So it's sounding kind of like properly practiced anarchy comes down to consent language.
It's largely about consent and non-coercion.
So
being part of that.
If you and I are going to meet up for dinner, but I live in Butte and you live in Dillon, we would say, hey, do you want to drive or should I drive? And then we talk about it and we decide. And you're not just going to be like, well, I'm going to drive to you because I'm the dude and that's what dudes do. Like we would agree, we would talk it over, figure out what each person actually wanted and see if we could come to an agreement about which town we were going to go to dinner in.
Right.
You would have
Or
different-
not agree. We might decide we're not going to have dinner because whatever. Yeah.
Neither of us wants to drive that night. Okay.
You would have different conversations with, say, your people at your workplace. How do you have a workplace without a boss, Dave?
Ooh.
Again, I would start with consensus.
Yeah.
And, build from there. I think at the workplace is actually a really great place to start these sort of social structures and organization.
Because you can do that.
Because
That's
we're
a
all
manageable place, right?
Yeah.
We all have things to do. We all need to find ways to be in the world, ways to express ourselves in the world, be it, whether it's for financial gain or just for the creative nature of being industrious. I want to throw out an example of what I would say. I want to be told if this is anarchy or not anarchy. All right, we'll play that game.
Okay.
So when I went to Standing Rock, there was a sign at the gate that said "No guns, no drugs," and that was pretty much the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody decided that there was a rule.
So the elders did.
Okay.
So the elders said, "Look, this is a prayer camp, so no room for that stuff, and we're here to hold space and to pray and to practice this nonviolent resistance to an offense." So what happened was there was no dictates from on high other than people respecting the elders. The elders said, "Hey, maybe not so much this," and then you say, "Okay, that we'll respect that." So there was no office that you went to find out who was in charge of security. People just formed security, and they got some walkie-talkies, and people did patrols and made sure everything was on the up and up. There was no hierarchy in that, other than that I saw anyway. When supplies started coming in to the camp, because people were trying to donate, cold weather was coming, so suddenly all this stuff shows up. Suddenly somebody starts running the depot. Somebody has a big tent, and they're saying, well, all the wire's going to go over here, and if you have gloves, you put them over here. Kitchen, self-organized. Some people said, I'm going to come out, and I'm going to help with the kitchen. There was no boss. People said, I can contribute this, and then they were employed in their contribution. People decided to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and walk around when it's 20 below zero and check on people in their cars to see if a gas heater was asphyxiating them or not. There was no structure. To me, that seemed like the sort of idealized version of anarchy.
Sure, yeah, I'd agree very much. As long as, there truly wasn't some hierarchical structure there that, was there some authority with the elders? And, there probably maybe was. And
Sure.
You'll see that a lot with experiments with anarchy, which there are a lot of good successful experiments like Standing Rock, but that these sort of hierarchies tend to crop back up unless you're consciously resisting it. But I'd say most of what you talked about there is definitely great examples of anarchy.
Principles.
There was agreements. Camp decided we don't want drugs, we don't want guns here.
Yeah, it makes things messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
then if you're going to enter into the camp, then that means you are agreeing to that previously consensus.
You're consenting.
Consensus.
You're
Right.
consenting to that.
Right.
Yeah. And you have your free will. You can turn around and go the other way.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it seems like if we were to begin to institute this kind of social
Interesting
democracy.
language. How do you institute anarchy?
Practice. If we were to begin to practice.
Okay.
If we were to begin to practice, good call, to begin to practice this kind of social democracy or anarchy, non-hierarchical social democracy, aka anarchy is kind of what it's sounding like. We could begin with communities, small communities like the Amish community, runs. When you enter into Amish community, you are running off of different rules than everybody outside of the Amish community. And a lot of those rules sound a lot like what you're saying anarchism is. Not really a lot of public-private property, a lot of sharing, a lot of agreements between everyone in the community, even though coming from rather Judeo-Christian-like religion, there are sexual hierarchies, men over women, and things like that.
I'd say that I mean, that particular society is rife with hierarchy and
Yeah,
and private
and
property.
religious.
They're not letting outsiders onto their property,
Okay.
and there's distinct authority, like you said, gender and other ways probably too.
Okay, so bad example.
No,
But
I think
theoretically.
aspects of it definitely are,
Yeah.
sharing. So another key part, at least for me, of anarchy is mutual aid. That on top of, agreeing on consensus, we agree that we're going to help each other. When I have more than what I need of something, I'm going to help you,
Yeah.
vice versa. If I have a skill that you lack and vice versa, we're going to share it with each other.
It seems like, and somebody's trying to give us a phone call right now.
Yeah,
we
we're not
mentioned
taking
this
calls.
at the top of the show. We're unable to take calls and also broadcast them to our live stream audience, which is where most people are participating these days. If you would like to, I'm going to open my email right now. You can send me an email at redhandedjill03@gmail.com, and I would love to include your commentary in our conversation today. So give that a try. It sounds really hard to begin to practice anarchy with the way that we're all spread out in society. Like every time I do laundry, I have so many towels. We acquire towels, like bath towel. We have a few nice ones I actually like to use for myself, and then a bunch of them are rags, and a bunch of them are, like the towel I use to stuff under the dishwasher when it's leaking, that sort of thing. But like we have way more towels than 2 humans need. We would be fine with 2 towels, maybe 4.
Maybe we can pull that off.
But like I don't. Other than just taking it to, we have these hubs for redistribution, and
Goodwill. What about
such
Goodwill?
as Goodwill,
Right.
BSW, and other thrift stores are in general the accepted hub in the U.S. of redistribution. I could take all my extra towels there, and if they feel like they could make money off of them, they would put them on the shelves. But there's not really like a way for me, like half of me just wants to put a shelf on my sidewalk and say free stuff.
Pay it forward, just
That's
give
a
it
good way
out.
to do it.
Yeah.
Except that I know last time I did that with a bunch of extra chairs, a guy in a pickup truck came by, picked them all up, and went and resold them on Facebook. And like that's what I'm like. That's fine, but like. I know one of my neighbors needs chairs because he just moved in and doesn't have any money for furniture. I just don't know which house he's in.
So I think there's a free cycling movement that addresses that, and sort of these other parallel institutions where, again, we agree that you're not going to take this to resell it. You actually need this, and you're welcome to
for
it
yourself.
because I had extra.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up your household. I think that's an example where you're probably already practicing anarchism. I don't know for sure, but is anybody in charge in your household? Is there an authority?
No.
I wouldn't say so.
No.
And you operate by consensus?
Yeah.
Aww.
You
Itty bitty anarchy. That's so cool. You find out new things. To the person that just tried to call us on the radio, you might not have heard me because you were on the phone hoping we would pick up. But you can send me an email at redhandedjill03@gmail.com, and I would love to include your commentary on our show. We just can't take phone calls right now.
Also, if you're on Facebook, you can always find Post-Orthodoxy on Facebook and type a little thing over in the comments.
Yeah, you can find it on the KBMF Butte America Radio Facebook page if you like. Okay, well it's 4:52.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts. Is there anything in particular you'd like to say as a person who has a strongly held belief of anarchism?
No, I'm interested in just having a conversation about
Okay.
it. Yeah.
So something that you brought up, Dark, when you were talking about Standing Rock.
Yeah.
Standing Rock. This is hindbrain stuff. This isn't necessarily things I'm incredibly proud of. But if I were a person who was really good at running a kitchen, I would want to volunteer to run the kitchen. Right. I would go to Standing Rock and I would say, I'm going to help you run a really healthy and supportive and frugal kitchen. And I would expect to acquire volunteers who would do what I said would be a good idea for a kitchen. And that's like, I think it's very rare.
Well, that would be an agreement.
But it's very rare, I think, to find somebody who is an expert in something who doesn't expect to be the person telling other people how to do it because they have the knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a distinction between having some sort of authority and leadership. I think there's room for leadership within anarchy and within these sort of circumstances. without it being an authoritarian
Okay,
relationship.
so that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Leadership
So also-
versus authority.
As Standing Rock grew, there were several different kitchens. So it's almost like there's the main mess that fed the biggest group, and then there was some place that just did soups.
So you
They
just
specialized in
would
soups.
show up in the morning to this giant tent, and people you didn't know had made a bunch of food for everybody?
Yeah.
Wow.
And all the food was being trucked in from California and Colorado. That's the other thing so that I got to watch it over about 2 or 3 months change, double in size, quadruple in size. And what I found interesting, watching that happen and observing the lack of authority, there was still people fudging, like the guy whose camp we were staying at, Benji Buffalo, he'd be like, the elder said, don't go out to the bridge. But I just need to make sure there's no trash laying around out there. So I'm going to go up and make sure all the trash is picked up. There's ways to fudge the rules a little bit.
In a wetsuit.
And yeah, he had a wetsuit under his coat, so he ended up standing in front of that water hose and laughing. But he was just there to pick up trash and got caught up.
Oh yeah, the rush of the moment.
Yeah.
So you used to think, Dave, that anarchy was meh.
Well, no, I mean, I kind of embraced it even at that point too, because I was an angsty teenager and it was
You heard about anarchy in
anti-authoritarian.
your teens?
Oh, I mean, in the sense that we all
Music.
have that it's chaos, and I had the anarchist cookbook when I was 15. Yeah.
So you did hear about anarchy in your teens. What's the anarchist cookbook?
I had the anarchist cookbook as well.
It was
Oh,
It was a rather controversial tome.
It was pretty controversial. It had all sorts of instructions for bomb making, drugs, all sorts of things, but most of it
how to get a
not
fake
very good
ID.
recipes.
Yeah, it was just general.
all the things you're not supposed to know knowledge.
Exactly, forbidden knowledge book.
Wow.
And that was before the internet. So if you had if you wanted to figure out suddenly how to make a bomb,
Or get a fake ID.
you just pull out your cookbook.
Wow, how interesting. When I was growing up, we had the dangerous book for boys. And then several years later, they made the dangerous book for girls, which was like way lame in comparison. But yeah, the dangerous book for boys was like how to start a fire, how to build a teepee with only a pocket knife, how to, it was like survival type stuff and some fun stuff. That was, like parental discretion advised activities, depending on how responsible your child is with fire and sharp objects. But yeah, that was nothing illegal. So,
So I want to talk about Standing Rock again, and because I have a question about that. So in the camp, as it grew, there was also there were villages within the village.
Mhm.
There were over 500 different tribes represented in the thing. So you had those actual tribal villages, and then you had a Red Warrior camp, which they didn't let anybody in that camp. It was a camp within the camp that you had to be invited into. You didn't just show up at that camp.
And that's who I camped with when I was there.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was its own world. And they had their own, there was tension, I think, between that camp and the elders. But it survived and it worked. The thing that I found interesting was watching this influx of people who came in. There were poor military guys that just wanted to support vets that wanted to support this movement that came up from Florida and had never been in cold weather before. There was a lot of, because of the huge influx of supplies and people, the management of all that stuff, I was really amazed at how it just kept stepping up. Somebody had knowledge, shared their knowledge. When the blizzard came, suddenly it was just, everybody just had a job suddenly. And everybody was doing their job.
so what's your question?
My question is, how does that sustain? How do you sustain? That was a temporary thing. It was a little petri
Everybody
dish.
was bonding together against something.
The flood was going to come in the spring. The camp had to go. It wasn't going to be permanent. But how would you see that becoming a more permanent place, or the evolution of that, and
Start
maybe
an
the
anarchy
problems of that?
neighborhood and all move into a certain neighborhood.
I mean, I think it's playing out right here, right now between us two. We have this node that we have this common experience of
Mhm.
going to that place and experiencing that. And so we're continuing to talk about these ideas and letting them grow. And I think that scalability of it is really important to me, that it starts with just interpersonal relationships. Um, we, we saw something there. How I ended up there was through similar experiences. I go out and hang out at rainbow gatherings every summer.
Right.
And it's, doesn't have the same impetus as Standing Rock did, but a lot of the similar aspects. It's a fairly anarchistic social structure. Kitchens sort of assimilate and feed everybody, and all the basic requirements organically build themselves. And so I had done a lot of work with water infrastructure in that context at rainbow gatherings. And so somebody from Red Warrior called me and said, hey, can you come and look at our water situation? And so I think, building on those nodes and, our node here, you and I, my node with this person who I had camped with before who said, hey, come check out this. This is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how it builds more than, I don't think camps like Standing Rock or rainbow gatherings are sustainable in any sense. There's all kinds of resources being poured in,
Right.
Including
Artificially,
fossil fuels,
yes.
and every other thing. So I don't think that necessarily is sustainable, but I think it is a learning experience where we build on that until, I think potentially it's something that sort of lays in wait until there's a vacuum, and then it becomes, the obvious choice. So.
Would you say that Burning Man, the event Burning Man, is an example of, has examples of what you're talking about in terms of anarchy?
Sure, it has examples, but it feels much more artificial there.
There's definitely no social impetus behind Burning Man other than fuller self-expression and community. Like, it's not like you're trying to stop the monster at the gate.
It was an example of leave no trace. It was an example of like, let's go have a really good time.
And respect the planet.
And leave the place like we found it.
Yeah, it's hard to think of Burning Man as being any kind of environmentally responsible with the amount of resources that get dumped into it, but
yeah, there's a lot to discuss around that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely elements, and the gift economy is maybe the prime example there that sort of emulates mutual aid. We're not going to make money off of each other. We're not going to sell things to each other.
Yeah, there's no commerce.
Yeah, if I am making omelets and I have more than enough, I'm going to share with my neighbor.
Right, and then that's how you meet people.
We have to take a break, gentlemen.
Oh,
We're
yeah,
going to
top of the
listen
hour.
to Joe Pug on our break, and I'm going to readjust the camera a little bit. And then when we come back, we've had a request for you to kind of give a little bit of a bio and where you're from and why the heck we should be listening to you about Anarchy.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. And it's 5:02. You're listening to KBMF LPB 102.5 FM. This is Post-Orthodoxy, the show about changing our minds. We'll be back very soon. Thanks for being here, Dave.
My pleasure.
All right,
Very
and as usual, is that your headphones being that loud?
Do it.
Whose headphones is that?
Oh, it's those over there.
Holy cow! Oh, that's really loud. We're gonna turn that down. For that person's ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, these headphones are real loud over here. How are your headphones, Dave?
Just fine, perfect.
We can't play the music for our folks on the radio because
Auto act.
FCC.
they will cut it off.
No, not FCC, whatever you call that. Copyright.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so, is everybody always naked at rainbow gatherings, or is that just optional? Because that's what I've heard, is rainbow
Clothing
gatherings
optional.
are
It's
naked.
optional, and it's become much more rare with the advent of cameras in everybody's
Cameras,
pocket.
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, that's another one of those things, like, yay the internet, but also boo, nobody can do anything questionable without it being available to everyone forever.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like
Trying to go pee?
our generation has something in common with Crazy Horse, and And the Crazy Horse was he lived on the border between history and mythos and mythology. There's no image of him. There's only stories of him, right?
So glad there was no social media.
There's no images. There's like isolated posed images of myself in my youth, but there is no record of my youth.
Right.
It's all like lives in my head.
Right. It's a
And
mythology.
it's a mythology for sure. Now we don't have those mythologies. We have all these strange,
imposed.
what do you call it? Like digital blocks.
Right.
It's very square in my brain. Clunky images. Yeah, I can't imagine being a kid in high school with everybody with a camera on them.
Oh god, I did so much stupid stuff. My poor parents.
So, where do you want to go from here?
Dave's bio.
Oh yeah.
From the Butte Frame Shop and Gallery, located on Main Street in Uptown Butte, just across from the Pecan Noodle Parlor. The Butte Frame Shop offers framing and matting services for holidays, works of art, and more. Reach them by phone at 782-7710.
And we're back. You're listening to KBMF LP Butte, 102.5 FM. This is Post-Orthodoxy, the show about changing our minds. Today, Dark and I are talking with Dr. Dave about anarchy. There's been a request from the audience for you to kind of tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah,
Dave.
we didn't actually properly introduce you.
No, we were just like, it's Dave! Yes!
Well, I'm going to repeat that I'm really no authority on anarchy at all, so I'll start with that.
I'll forgive you.
I'm just a casual anarchist.
Casual.
And my bio, I teach up at Montana Tech. I try to be real involved in Superfund and public policy and that sort of realm here. I'm a dad, and yeah, I don't know.
So is Elijah going to listen to our show? Would he listen to it? If we sent him this show afterwards, would he listen to it?
You know, several times I've turned it on when you were on to be like, hey, it's Ainsley, and
Yeah.
he's like, meh.
Yeah. If she were here, we could watch Ladybug and Cat and More, but she's not, so I'm going to watch without her. I can see that happening.
So no, he doesn't care.
Yeah, he wanted the family in person sort of guy, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, love that guy. Let's see. So, yeah, you teach at Montana Tech.
He's doctor. Dave.
Doctor of philosophy, even ironically. Even though I don't really know anything
You
about
got a doctor of
philosophy.
philosophy from Montana Tech?
Yeah, in material science, so it's really not
Philosophy of material sciences. That's so interesting. Wait. Oh well, that's another topic for another time.
See, if we were really professional,
I thought philosophy was the brains.
we would do the show where we build it up like our guest today, Dr. David Hutchins, philosopher.
I'm gonna do that from now on.
Yeah,
I guess.
we got to do a little more.
Right. We have to remember
Little
that there are
tap
people
dance.
that tune in to our show who don't know everybody.
That's true.
And that we interact with all the time.
It's anarchy in here.
Yeah.
Well, I also,
Oh my gosh.
I want to resist that hierarchy. A few letters after my name doesn't make me more of an authority.
Which I
But-
knew almost as soon as I knew that you had a doctorate, you were like, please don't call me Dr. Dave.
I'm gonna call you Dr. Dave because you did the work
It's
to
a
get
great
the letters.
DJ name.
You did the
It's
work
a
to get the
great
letters.
DJ name.
Good porn name too, probably.
Yeah, Dr. Dave. This is community radio.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, come on. So anarchy, and it really is sort of seeming like it's becoming synonymous with like consent language and social programs and true democracy, and like, why do people think of anarchy as bad?
Well, I mean, I think,
If you
when
look,
you're anti-authoritarian and you're anti-state, people immediately think chaos,
lawlessness,
and
because that's in
the
the definition,
The
lawlessness.
godless communists.
Yes.
But I think it's actually quite nonviolent, and maybe that's
The proper expression of anarchy is nonviolence.
correct.
Because I know lots of people call things total anarchy that's actually like a really violent riot.
Sure, and I mean we
They
have
call
to
that anarchy.
distinguish between anarchists doing violent things in pursuit of their philosophy. That occurs, sure.
Mhm.
But the philosophy itself, in opposing these hierarchies and these power struggles, you are opposing implicit violence within our society that we don't even talk about.
Right.
There's a lot of violence behind those hierarchies.
Right.
I'm sitting here looking at our courthouse, and if you don't obey what the authorities in that beautiful neoclassical building there say, you will be met with violence.
Right.
Okay, and now I want to throw something out there.
Okay.
Let's talk about maybe the crossover of anarchy with libertarianism. Do you think I see a lot of common ground.
My brain's exploding a little bit.
There's a lot of common ground.
I mean, I think
philosophically,
there's liberty as the common ground, but I think it might end there. And I think most libertarians and people who might identify as anarcho-capitalists are being disingenuous about being anarchists. They actually do endorse hierarchies, power structure, and the implicit violence. So I can see that. I think the left-right split there. I'm not claiming any of those guys on the right within anarchy.
Right. Okay.
Anarcho-capitalists.
Yes.
Define that one.
Haves and have-nots.
I mean, it's essentially modern libertarianism. They want all the liberty.
And don't want to be, and don't seem to want to have any share in responsibility for the community.
Exactly.
That seems to be the case.
Individuated.
Very individuated.
Extremely individuated anarchy.
Right.
So, like, your personal little bubble of anarchy.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's odd because I grew up around a lot of people who call themselves libertarians. It seems it is thought of in the circles I came from as more personal, progressive capitalism. Like capitalism, but take care of your neighbor is libertarianism. Like the way I was taught growing up. And since I'm meeting other libertarians outside of Christian circles who aren't necessarily as influenced by the golden rule as the libertarians that I knew growing up, it really does seem like libertarianism is, I'm going to do my things and take care of myself and my stuff, and if I like you, I will help you, and if I don't like you, I will not help you.
And you can't cross my lawn.
Yeah.
Or my street.
Private property is
private. Everything is private.
My stuff, and if I feel like sharing, that's my right. And anarchism isn't forcing people to share, but that's why it's more of a philosophy than a political structure, because it's coming from a heart place of if we are all having a better time, we will all have a better time.
Sure, yes. And maybe that's the divide, is cooperation versus coercion.
That's so funny because libertarians are like so anti-coercion. Don't make me help people that I don't want to help. Like that's our conversation all the time. I'll help you guys because I know you, but I don't want to be forced through taxes to help people that I don't know.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So, cooperation versus coercion. One more time.
What?
Well, like you were saying, libertarianism is coercion.
Yeah, I think they're being disingenuous. They are relying on coercion. They're relying on the state. They're relying on the implicit violence. Within capitalism, within our political structures, and so they're not really anti-coercion. They're just anti-state coercion of them.
So how do you feel, and this is a bit of a sidebar, but I think you brought up a good comparison between anarchy and libertarianism. How do you feel, Dave, about, how do you feel libertarians coerce people?
Through those fundamental concepts like private property, and private property relies on a state to enforce those sort of ideas. So
No, you do with your gun.
What's that?
No, you do.
You just do it. You enforce that.
You work. You raise money.
You do it with your gun.
You hire
Sure.
that's what we've been told. You hire a guy to police your property for you.
Yeah, you just hire him.
And if somebody else hasn't hired a guy to police his property and he gets robbed, then he's a schmuck.
Yeah, that's coercion at the point of a gun. So yeah.
Who's being coerced in that situation?
The trespasser, I guess.
Yeah, we're getting real deep into anti-private property in a way that my brain is not really ready to discuss. Because you're saying someone is being coerced to not trespass on my house.
Well, no.
That doesn't,
house-
like, coercion is like, I'm gonna make you do something, but if somebody is trespassing in my house or my lawn where my kids play, and you're saying it's me coercing them to make them get off my lawn, I'm not sure.
Okay, we have to make a distinction
Freaking out a little
though,
bit.
Yeah.
between
Okay.
private property and personal property. So your home, what you need to live, is your personal property, and
Okay.
you're allowed that in my version of anarchy.
Okay.
Private property is more like, oh, you own this section of forest that you are going to cut down,
Okay.
and you're going to keep me out of it at the point of a gun. That's private property.
So if I have a house and kids and a section of forest, and maybe I hunt deer in my section of forest and my kids play in that section of forest, why is it wrong for me to want to keep unknown factors out of the section of forest that my kids live in and that I hunt food from?
Well, because it's not your forest, it's everybody's.
I don't know if I'm going to cross that bridge today. I'm being confronted in a way sort of similar to how I was being confronted when we first started talking about evolutionism
Evolution,
versus
yeah.
creationism, where I did not know that I had a giant wall in my brain about private property, but apparently I do. So we're gonna have to come up with that later. Saint Savages on Twitch says this guy is all for taking other people's stuff.
Yeah, are you all for taking other people's stuff? How do you respond to that, Dr.
All for taking other people's stuff. I mean, I guess, why is it your stuff? And again, I'm not taking your toothbrush. That's your personal property. I don't have my sights on your toothbrush.
Right.
But if you own more than you need, if you own 1,000 properties uptown, yeah, in an ideal world, we don't make money off of each other that way.
So you
We
think
each only have what we need.
people should only own what they need to be happy?
Well,
Well,
I mean, I'm
that's
not
not
gonna.
easy to define.
Yeah.
Only own what they need to live healthy.
Well, I think, we would decide that as a society. We would come together and consensus on what do we need. A family with 2 adults and 3 kids needs a 4-bedroom household. We've decided that. And, personal property is fine.
Okay. So your
Private
house.
property, especially in the sense of, in the context of capitalism, where you're making money off of other people.
You seem almost specifically against people owning literal dirt land.
Sure, I mean.
Like as a principle in your heart, and that humans should not own dirt land. Like, I don't want to just say
There's-
land, but I
there's-
just mean like the ground that is around my house that my children play in, I should not own.
Sure, I can agree with that. I mean, I don't mind you putting a fence around your home to keep your dog and your kids in, but in the sense of most of the land should be the commons. It should be a shared resource.
I think
And
I know
it
what's
should be
happening.
shared
What's
way
happening?
beyond just humans.
What's happening?
I think I'm doing that thing that people do a lot of the time where I have been trained to be mad about things rich people are mad about.
Ah, yes.
But I am not a rich person
You don't
who
even
owns
own
thousands
it.
of properties.
You don't have any property.
And yet I'm being mad that you want
That's
to
the idea.
that you want to take my property. And
Some
when,
good training
when in
there.
fact you would not be, basically what you're saying is I can totally have a house and a yard for my children and be safe and put a fence and keep weirdos out and that's all fine. What you are speaking out against is the rampant possession of the planet over and above what a single human needs to be happy and survive.
Sure.
And I am not, and nor will I ever be in that category, but I have been trained to be mad about what you're talking about as if I were in that category of rampant land possession of the planet.
And I think the discontinuity with the language is not a coincidence. I think things that are a direct challenge to the power structures, like ideas like anarchy and socialism, have been smeared and effectively smeared. I mean, growing up in the 80s myself and the Cold War, I thought communism was the worst possible philosophy on earth. And, socialism and anarchy close
All
second
the same
and third.
thing,
Yeah.
bad soup.
Yeah.
San Savages, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, says he comes from Yugoslavia and he knows what he's talking about. It's always funny hearing somebody who was never part of any similar system talking about it as if it's okay.
I'd like to hear more about the
I know, I'm like,
system
what was
that-
anarchy
yeah.
like in Yugoslavia?
I would like to know too.
Yeah, I'm really curious because I know that I'm coming from a very privileged position of just thinking about how things are for me in the US, and
So-
that many other countries have many other
Sure.
experiences of these things.
So this idea of what you're talking about with land and property, that's not a foreign concept in the human endeavor.
No.
Wait,
Um,
which one's not
The
foreign?
idea of the idea of owning land is a fairly new thing.
in the grand scheme.
in the
Right,
grand
owning
scheme
a
of
planet,
things.
owning
So
a piece of the planet.
Before people like owned a square of land, that wasn't a concept for people, right? So if you look at like indigenous cultures or whatever, you carve out your space, don't be a jerk to your neighbors.
Mhm.
You die, somebody else, your kids move in, whatever. Or
Or if you don't like it anymore, you leave and go find something else.
goes, right. So that idea of, it's an interesting construct that we are programmed to think of land as property.
Mm.
I've struggled with that a lot too. Like, what's the difference between land and property? It's a social construct.
Well, and to be fair, we are all discussing, and you're probably going to object to this word, but it is colloquially thought of as the utopian version of anarchy. And I understand that my perception colloquially of the word utopia is not actually what a utopia is, and that utopias are in general often really unhealthy societies. But most people say utopia and they think the best possible version of it where everyone is happy.
Sure.
And we're not accounting for the jerks who just have the power to take your property or whatever, and so they will, you know?
Yeah, I'm definitely talking about an ideal, and there's
Yes.
many, practical impediments to implementing this today.
Mhm.
I'm well aware of that.
Right.
Especially if it wasn't implemented in a global sense. It'd be really hard to implement it in a vacuum.
Mhm.
And I think going back to what you're saying about, there's lots of examples of shared land and this sort of thing. I think
Right.
they've frequently been done in a very authoritarian political regime, and that's not anarchy.
So in Hawaii, the way they used to do it, they had what they call a kuleana system. And the kuleana system was, here's a valley, and there's a king of that part of the island. That king's kuleana is like 7 valleys. And everybody, the idea was that you had your kuleana, and they break it down hierarchical, right? Is that you have this patch of the valley. This fall, king's going to come by, and we're going to throw a party for the king. And the king sees what everybody's done in the valley. And if you haven't been pulling your weight, they kill you.
If you haven't been taking care of the valley.
Yeah, they kill you and then put somebody else there. And then they have a big fat party for the people that didn't kill.
We need the land to be prosperous so that all of us can survive and
You can have a good
thrive.
time, right? So, that worked for a while. And then they had 3 months where they didn't.
I
They
would
just
say
partied.
that's probably kind of a form of enforced social democracy.
Definitely
You
enforced.
must take care of the land, you must produce, and you must share it.
The kuleana system was a kapu system. Kuleana was the property, and the kapu system was basically, that was the law. The law was whatever the king says you don't do or we kill you. It was not a big legal book. Just basically, you don't do that.
Don't do what?
Whatever the kapu is.
Mary Kay Craig says hello. She thought I sounded
Mary Kay
like she
Craig.
thought I sounded like you.
So Robert Everett chimed in. He said, "Wait, you got a home? I'm moving myself and 3 kids and wife into Dart's house. That's great. He has some skills. He can help around the house a little bit."
Yeah, we need some brickwork done.
So we got a statement here. Maybe I'd like to hear your thoughts on the statement from Robert Everett. History has told us socialism and communism is a bad idea, not some misperception. What I find really, and before you answer that, what I find really interesting is there seems to be, people say socialism and they interchange it with capitalism, and we weren't talking about socialism necessarily. There's democratic socialism, there's various kinds, there's corporate socialism.
Capitalistic socialism.
Capitalism, yes, right. So what do you say to this idea that history has told us that socialism and communism is a bad idea?
I would agree. Most of the examples in the last couple hundred years that where they tried socialism or communism, they did it in a authoritarian political climate, and I agree.
So no argument there.
No.
Right. I would also say that in place of socialism and communism, you could also put capitalism
Sure.
and say capitalism is a bad idea.
Right.
There's
There's examples
it's
of people
hurting a
suffering.
lot of
there's a lot of
right.
So
So can I interject really quickly?
Please,
Because
join in.
I grew up in a very ultimatum bubble, full of ultimatums, and the ultimatums made you feel safe. And if one ultimatum started crumbling, you padded it up with a bunch of other ultimatums. And so it was that if people just did the free market correctly, this was one of them, the free market is the best idea. If you want socks and somebody has socks, you can trade them for something or you can give them money for it. If you want socks and 18 other people want socks and there are only 10 pairs of socks, then that person can charge more for socks and get more money and make more socks and provide more socks. Or if there are a lot of people making socks in town, the price is going to be lower. You know, it's like all these things that I didn't really understand very much, but what I've learned since getting out of that kind of idealistic environment where we did act as if everybody was trying to be nice to each other all the time, and so therefore free market would work, is that actually the free market is horribly abused and is very hurtful for people. So I think it's a really good point that we can continue to bring up whenever somebody is like, yes, but we know communism is bad because history. It's like there is an idealistic philosophy of communism and an idealistic philosophy of capitalism or the free market, and then there is what is actually being practiced by humans on the planet. And those things so far have been pretty harmful, both of them.
Sure, I agree. And I think, you know, the free market probably has, you know, some noble ideas too. But in the context of capitalism and the society we have now, yeah, it's horribly abused. I think there would be a sort of a free market within my version of anarchy too. I really like Michael Albert's take on it. He talks about participatory economics, and that the workers organize in communes and make these sort of decisions as a group. And there is a free market, but it's, you know, as a group, we're going to decide things like, oh, there are, you know, externalities attributed to mining that aren't being taken into account in the free market we have now. What if we included those sort of costs, the pollution, the threats to ecology and human health? What if we included those costs in mining? What if that's our version of a free market?
More awareness of the cost, and I think that's that's the thing where I often feel like Robert Edwards is angry about rich people problems. We're not saying that Robert Edwards should be horrifically taxed. We're saying that somebody who's running thousands of semi-trucks across the country should be more taxed than they are being because of the literal tax that it is putting on the environment and the roads. Sure. Those sorts of things. I shared a link in our Facebook live feed, a link to Michael Albert, activist. There's also a Michael Albert artist, so people don't get confused. Sans Savages, I'm just going to say it like that. I hate when people say the real communism wasn't tried. Yes, of course, after more than 150 million people died, it really wasn't tried very much, was it? Capitalism is great, but the problem is it's not regulated really well, and thus why people are abusing it.
Okay.
Thoughts?
I don't think more regulation would help, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Robert Edwards wants to know how the free market is being abused.
I think there's like these feedback loops that occur. So like if you have a lot of money, you're more likely to get more money. If you don't have any money, you're not getting the feedback loop coming back and making you more money. So I feel like our feedback loops have gotten to the point where somebody who has become financially wealthy and decides to use that wealth to influence, let's say, our political system, by a candidate and by basic change the direction of the country through monetary influence, that of course, through changing laws, through changing regulations, you increase your feedback loop and you become richer and richer, and then that has a disproportionate impact on the rest of the people around you. So that's how I visualize it. When I see a multi-billionaire, I see it as feedback out of the amp at the show. Something is way out of whack. That's how it looks to me. That there's a imbalance in the environment, And nature will correct that imbalance. I mean, that's what nature does. Eventually, the imbalance will be corrected. If there's I used Yertle the turtle as the sort of example this week, is at one point you pile enough stuff on top of the lower class and they will buck the system. And that's what happens if you don't, there's a number of billionaires that are saying the pitchforks are coming if we don't actually have some empathy for the people whose backs we're walking on, where our wealth came from.
Mhm.
So how is it being abused? Citizens United, I think, is really like the tip of the iceberg of how it's being abused. That's the part that is above the surface that we get to see that you can, people will say, well, whatever, Hillary Clinton had $1 billion in her campaign and she didn't win. So obviously there's money in politics doesn't count. And I would say it's an endemic problem. You can point to one example and say it worked here or it didn't work here. But when the idea of us living in an oligarchy, I mean, that's the definition of an oligarchy, is where the rich and powerful are conducting all the business. And there's a thin veneer of democracy. We talk about democracy, but it's not happening. Democratic Republic is not happening on the national level.
Right.
So that, to me, tells me that why are the people who are supposed to represent us not representing us?
Because they're being paid not to.
It has something to do with the money.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a hard equation.
It's a pretty strong correlation to me. They're being paid money by people who have different interests than the citizens of the U.S. interests. It would make sense that they would go towards the interests of the person giving them the money.
Right. Yes.
That makes sense. I looked up the definition of communism. This
look it
is just a straight up political ideology definition.
Okay.
A socio-economic order structured around the ideas of common ownership of the means of production and the absence of social classes, money, or the state. That sounds a lot like democratic socialism or anarchy. Communism, like the ideal version of communism, sounds like citizens are in charge. You don't have super rich people running everything. I mean, I would have to do more research as to what actually happened. Obviously, a lot of people died and it was really horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was actually implemented wasn't, that kind of anarcho-communism. It was an authoritarian version, and partially because, like I was saying, it can't happen in a vacuum. There's, especially if the world power at that time is capitalistic and there's a lot of pressure.
Was the world power of the red state capitalistic?
No, I'm saying the United States was the world power at that time.
No.
So to try and enforce communism
Mm-hmm.
in Soviet Russia, it was very authoritarian.
Are you saying the U.S. was enforcing communism in Soviet Russia? What are you saying? I'm confused.
I'm saying,
Historically speaking.
because it wasn't happening globally, a global implementation of a communism, they felt they had to do it in an authoritarian way.
Okay.
Just like we have to go around and spread freedom with a gun.
Right. Or it was my job to get people to come into the kingdom of heaven by telling them all the ways they were messing up. Come be in my club and not do any of that fun stuff you're doing, so you can be in the Jesus Club. Robert Edwards says, what's that thing that we were talking about? Citizens United isn't capitalism, it's corporatism.
Yes. Right.
So don't tread on his beautiful capitalism, because Citizens United
capitalism,
isn't it.
like socialism. I mean, it gets used and abused and thrown around. And
Would you say Citizens United is abusing capitalism?
That is a corrupt system. That is a corrupted capitalistic system.
It's happening within a capitalistic system.
It's happening within, right.
They're
in the
using capitalism
system, right.
abusively.
So
Citizens,
it's corruption.
Yeah. Corporatism is corrupt capitalism, and that's what we've got in the U.S.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yes.
that's pretty fair.
I mean, it's all being done above board and legally, though, so I don't know if you can really call it corruption.
Morally corrupt
Is
as
it?
opposed to civically corrupt.
Sure, yeah. Morally corrupt. I'll agree with you
Yes.
there.
Humanitarianly corrupt as opposed to civically corrupt. Robert Edwards also feels like you were contradicting yourself by saying,
good.
which I don't think you've said. I think an oligarch is a person in power because of extreme wealth.
That's a plutocrat.
Oh?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So oligarchs are either in power because of extreme wealth, or they are in power because they know the right people or are in the right family, so to speak. Power through influence. I think
Small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution.
Right.
That is an oligarchy.
Yes. So it's a both and. It's a Venn diagram, Robert Edwards. It's logically possible.
Yeah, all those things are. It doesn't. There's a. You were having a discussion with Robert.
I don't want to get into that right now. I want to go back to Anarchy with Dave.
Okay, very
We
good.
went way away from Anarchy with Dave.
All right, carry on.
And going down those roads are very interesting because these are all of a lot of people, when you bring up a good response to something that they dislike, will just slip down the slope to another thing that they dislike, rather than responding to your good response.
Actual thing.
And you've brought up some really good points about anarchy, the ideal philosophical version of anarchy. Do you have any other strongly held socio-philosophical beliefs?
Outside of anarchy?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, again, there's the Venn diagram.
In companion with anarchy?
Yeah, I would say I tend towards anarcho-syndicalism, so workers organizing together. So the labor organizing circle in my Venn diagram overlaps a lot with the anarchist circle.
So is that only including people who organize into labor unions? How does anarcho-syndicalism, how would I fit into that as just an independent artist?
You would be a part of a syndicate.
Syndicate of artists?
You would certainly be part of a union,
Yeah.
So the union that I am part of is the Industrial Workers of the World, which is the one big union. So everybody organizes together, all workers. And there's room for everybody, even independent contractors.
Anybody
nonprofits.
working?
I think there's probably room
Because
for people not working
industrial kind of implies to me certain industries.
Well, the industrial part of that is as opposed to trade unionism, which is what you see in our beautiful Carpenters Union Hall here, is they organize by trade. And so you have the carpenters unionized, you have the electricians, and you have the janitors. And what might happen at your workplace is they'll actually pit the unions against each other, the janitors versus the teachers, or whatever it happens to be. So this is a different, more all-encompassing union where all the workers organize, and organized by industry, so there's not that pitting against each other.
Anybody working for someone else gets together and agrees with other people working for someone else that they shouldn't be screwed over by the person they're working for?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
power and numbers.
Union. Okay. That's very interesting. Do you feel like you've successfully instituted anarchistic practices in your life right now in Butte?
Oh, I don't, it's one of those things that there's never an end to it. It's like striving for something always, and I strive for it in all my relations, including places where it's very challenging for me. So I want to be an anarchistic parent. I want my kids to feel like they are equal with me.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Like, there's a natural, I have more experience. I have, things I bring to the table that make me tend towards
because I'm an expert, authority. You should listen to me.
Right, but I want to resist that.
Right.
And so I'm trying to implement it on every scale of my life, sometimes more successfully than others.
A philosophy of equity that you find very valuable and profitable.
Yeah.
And psycho-emotionally profitable.
Sure.
Fascinating.
And to all aspects, I wouldn't try to exploit other people to make money off of them. That's something I just would not do. So.
What if you're creating jobs, Dave?
So if there's room for that, if I want to hire somebody and we're making this widget and the person who is working with me provided this much of widget A, I would try to remunerate that person in the ratio of their contribution.
So as opposed to capitalism, where you try to make the most money off of what you're doing, you try to make sure everybody involved is well taken care of and nobody is making any more than anybody else. It's fair, proportionate to the input.
Correct. Yeah.
A lot of people, I think that's a lot of people's frustrations probably the easiest example that I've heard so far with extreme capitalism is like the CEO. Like, what's he doing other than having been the person that was clever enough socially to get to the top? Like, he's not actually making the things or distributing the things or running the social media channel. He has now become the face of the thing or the person that started the thing. That's great, but he shouldn't have the most money just because it was his idea to start the thing.
Sure. I mean, I think, there's a lot of different examples of how that could play out, but there might be room for a leadership position, somebody who doesn't necessarily work on the widget, and that person should be paid according to their contribution.
So it's 5:39, and I've had the wonderful experience that's very fascinating for me because I'm not scared of things that challenge me, of hitting a horrible wall about private property today, and I really appreciate you helping me, giving me something to chew on. We're going to step into our last segment of the show where we talk about a new alternative society style, which is metamodernism. It's one of Dark's favorite things to be studying these days, and we'd love it if you'd like to stick around and ponder metamodernism with us.
Sure, yeah, I'll listen in.
Cool. So before you step into that, a brief throwback to the very beginning of the show when I was bringing up challenges such as call it the U.S., not the Americas, or not America, out of respect for the 22 other countries in America. And Jerry Lee went and did some research and came back. She said Ainsley, the Americas were named after Amerigo Vespucci and referred to generally by that name. And then she gave his bio from Wikipedia. So yes, the Americas were named for Amerigo Vespucci. I feel like that kind of plays into my hand more so than Jerry's hand, that the continents were named the Americas, not just the U.S. was named the Americas.
So the difference is the S.
Right.
You're splitting some hairs here a little bit. What made this a cause that you wanted to take on? The idea of saying the U.S. and not just saying America. What made it a cause?
Burgeoning awareness that most U.S. citizens think of the U.S. as really hot stuff on the planet. And in general are unaware that other people in other countries are having a completely different and equally valid experience of the planet. The U.S. hasn't been around very long. We don't do everything the best way compared to other countries. And when you call the U.S. America, I feel as though you're doing yourself a disservice by almost brainwashing yourself that we are all that. We are America, instead of just a country in an enormous continent full of countries on a planet full of countries. We just happen to be a very large landmass country, but that's kind of our only claim to fame. We haven't been around. Like, we're one of the youngest countries.
So what do we call ourselves if not American?
U.S. citizens.
That's a little clunky.
Too many syllables.
Yeah, sorry you're feeling lazy, but that's accurate. Brazilians.
Well, it's like the
Canadians.
What are the Mormons? We can't call them Mormons. We call them the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ.
Are you a United Statesian?
I'm a United States citizen. Or a citizen of the United States. I am also an American. No, I've really taken this on. I took this on in like July.
A longer path.
Yeah, I almost never slip up anymore.
I tend to agree with you, and I have experienced it in other places where they take offense to it.
Yeah, they're like, what do you mean you're American?
Oh, really?
Mokai brings that up all the time with people.
Yeah.
He does.
That's, I think, maybe where it started.
It was,
Mokai.
yeah, it was. And I don't remember specifically his story, but he was really digging, pointing out to people when they called it America.
Right.
Like he would bring up something about Canada and they'd be like, no, America. And he's like, oh, so Brazil? And they'd be like, no, America. Yeah, so anyway, I'm sticking to my guns on that one.
So I made a post on the comments on Facebook.
Needless War Memorial.
I made a link to an article titled The Meta-Modern Aristocracy. This is from the Meta Moderna website, which is extrapolations of chapters of the book. So riffing loosely on the principles in the book. Metamodernism, I wanted to bring this up after what we were talking about, and I think we can stop. It's just a few paragraphs, but you can stop me at any point if you have thoughts. I'm interested in reading this stuff out loud because I see a lot of people churning over socialism or communism or capitalism, and I feel like maybe there's other options. There's other options that we might be able to explore, and I think that might help shed some light on our current situation. So this is from that Meta-Modern Aristocracy article. The meta-modern aristocracy are people who have a combination of two things: great privilege and high personal development. The privilege I speak of is high total, quote, total capital, a concept I elaborate on further in further detail in the book, Nordic Ideology, meaning that we are not necessarily rich in the conventional sense, but we have enough opportunities and support around us to do pretty much whatever we want to do with our lives. So, total capital is a combination of social capital, cultural capital, economic capital, emotional capital, sexual capital, and good health. So, in this in this world, I think the way that I was raised is that the only way I can do things is to have money. Once I get money, then I can do things. He's saying, no, you have other forms of capital. He goes on to say, high total capital means that you can live your life relatively unafraid. The second part about personal development is that we have high effective value meme. This is something I've had to struggle with today.
Because we think of a meme as a witty picture on the internet.
The
but there's
value
another
meme
definition.
is closer to Richard Dawkins' definition of a packet of information. A packet of information that transmits itself.
The word meme came about before the internet did.
Yes. Effective value meme, which the meaning of which you can read more about in my book, blah, blah, blah. In a word, it just means that these people are genuinely progressive and have the values of global, sustainable, internet age civilization. So that's the value meme that he's talking about. A value meme could be modernism, and you live in the modernist meme perspective, value meme, or a postmodern or a meta-modern. So these are basically zeitgeists of how you perceive the world and your place in the world.
Perspectives.
So the idea of a sustainable internet age civilization, I find this very interesting. So he says, so who are these people? It says, we're playful eccentrics of various sorts. We are screwed up and brilliant million-dollar babies, people who have somehow fallen outside of the normal meaning-making processes of everyday life without breaking apart, and for whom there is no going back to a bourgeois lifestyle. You will find meta-modern swashbucklers, mavericks, hackers, intellectual revolver men, subtle enemies of the bourgeois lifestyle in which you are supposed to take life very seriously, especially your job, but never seriously aspire to truly change the world. The meta-modern aristocracy is a playful vanguard of a new form of society in which people are free in a deeper sense than what everyday life in modern society normally allows. Something picks up speed, gains momentum. The aristocracy acts with the kind of elegant conviction that can flow only from an embrace of the paradoxical and complex nature of reality. Take all that. Thoughts?
Wait. Do your real person breakdown of that. What does all that mean to you in like 2 sentences?
So the breakdown. So when we talk about social structures and we talk about social norms, those are governors on our behavior and our expectations of the world around us and ourselves. So what he's saying is the aristocracy, the meta-modern aristocracy, the vanguard, are people who are starting to break down those structures, sociosexual structures, political ideology structures, religious structures. They're breaking those down. And then now there is the possibility of actively creating a world that is outside those structures. So currently, I feel like the way that crabs and snakes shed their shells, they get too hard. They come out soft, and then there's a growth spurt, and they grow with the growth spurt, and then they calcify, and they have to be left behind. I feel like that's my perspective of where we are. We have a lot of calcified institutions that are no longer serving their functions.
Not helping the citizens.
They're not helping anymore. So now there has to be new structures. And this vanguard are people who can imagine new structures by being different, and not the timidness that is required in the beginning to step out of a social structure, to step out of a church, to step out of like, I was a Republican and now I'm going to go be with the libtards. No, you have to, there's a tender moment where you have to expose yourself to being eaten by the wilds of something outside of the norm. That's what the vanguard is. These are people who have stepped out, survived, and are now creating new structures, new expectations.
Which will bubble up and shed off the old structures?
Well, I think it's a natural process. And so I've just reached a point where I'm tired of defending the old and trying to compare and contrast, trying to change the system by using the broken system. The system's broken, and you're trying to use the mechanisms of that broken system to change the system, and it feels a little Sisyphean. So
what do you think of that, Dave?
I guess I've thought about this a lot in relation to my son, and being in this culture that I feel like is dominated by capitalism, where if somebody asks, what do? You tell them about your job.
Your job, right.
And so exploring this idea with my son who has Down syndrome and will never be a productive member of society
Quote,
by
unquote.
the metrics of capitalism. If your entire value is based on your production value, he is a worthless human. But what I have found is that there's a lot to be gained from a neurologically diverse community, and these other sort of capitals, like you talk about, emotional capital, and things that he actually far exceeds my own.
High emotional capital.
Much emotional
yes, high
capital.
emotional capital.
Very
yes.
loving, connective person.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree. I think we have to step out of some of these foregone conclusions, like your value is your production and these sort of things, and
pivotal assumptions.
Yeah.
So we're going to have an interview with Hansi, the guy that's writing this stuff. We're going to have an interview with him coming up, 17th of? No.
19th of March.
19th of March.
Yeah, mid-March.
So,
That's
and I'm going to be trotting out a little piece from that book. I haven't bought the book yet, but I think I'm going to have to read it before we have him on the show. Although I do like being ignorant and asking the questions, but
I feel like it's kind of respectful if you're having an author on the show to be like, so I've read your book, and we can be non-prescriptive as well as have read the book.
Right, so if you're interested in the thing that I was just reading, that link is in the comments of our Facebook feed, but if you just want to find it, Metamoderna is the website.
.org.
And there's a number of really interesting articles on there. While the Metamodern Aristocracy is the one that we clicked on. So you can Google that.
Medium.com also hosts a lot of metamodernist conversations.
Yes.
I also shared a link in our Facebook live stream, the metamodernism in 5 terrible diagrams, which I just keep going back and looking at because it's helping me to understand what were we doing from like 1600 to 1800, and what we're doing from 1800 to 1950, and then we've been doing something completely different from like 1950 to now, and now we're talking about an even further progression and evolution. I think it, a big part of why I call the U.S. and not America is you have to be aware of where you are in order to be aware of where you want to grow to. And if we already think we're total hot stuff and all that, then we don't have a potential for evolution because we're mentally blocking ourselves by thinking we've already arrived. And we haven't arrived by any means in any position in society anywhere. Like, we all should keep evolving and be aware that there could be something better.
Right. That's why I'm a little, I've checked out to some degree in the political stuff, because this traumatized state that so many people are in, that we just have to defeat Trump. That's the only thing that is important in this election, I feel, is trauma talking, because
focusing on the thing that's hurting you rather than on what you want to
what's
do.
more important in this election than Trump or Bernie Sanders is who's in Congress and who's in the Senate and who's in your governorship and who's like, we're not talking about that right now. We're doing the celebrity gossip of politics, and we're not actually utilizing this referendum, this time of referendum, to say maybe we need to change our voting. Maybe more importantly is to implement ranked choice voting and see if we can get out of this deadlock of 2 parties.
Get corporate bribery out of politics.
Maybe we can deal with the corruption, because your vote doesn't mean much if you're sending somebody to Washington to go work for a corporation. that has not your interest in mind.
Right. If you're
So-
curious about those topics, you can look up represent.us.
Yeah,
The Represent Us movement is all about
it's a
rebooting U.S. government and getting corruption out of politics.
It's a nonpartisan organization. They're not blaming one side or the other. They're
Nope.
saying the system itself needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and
No
it
matter what side
causes
you're
it
on.
causes us to fight each other when we
Right.
should be more working together.
So,
I think Dan and Patty are coming in at 6.
oh good.
Yeah, we had
Sunday
Madame
Smackdown.
Butterfly's Random Songs. Got it right this time. I was calling it Mixed Tunes. Madame Butterfly's Random Songs past couple of weeks, but I think Dan and Patty are back for the Sunday Smackdown from 6 to 8. So another great talk show here on your local community radio station.
How do you feel about your interview and your time here at the Post-Orthodoxy radio program?
Dr. Dave.
Oh, I think we just scratched the surface. But,
Always.
Yes.
Yeah, I love to get these ideas out on the table and conversations.
I was pleasantly surprised that I don't hate anarchy. No, really. I kind of thought I was like, Dave has some kind of out there ideas, and he's probably going to explain it, and I'm going to be like, that makes sense, but I don't really like feeling that way, so I'm just not going to do it. But I think I would actually really like being an anarchist. Like,
And maybe you already are.
ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Thanks very much, Dave.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So.
Nice hat, too. It was a very nice hat.
They don't even get to see it out in Radio Land.
No, our blessed streamers in Radioland, I think we had like 6 or 7 people listening online, which means probably 3 or 4. And then we had upwards of 10, 15 people at the peak of our live stream on Facebook
On
and
Facebook,
Twitch.
right? And then plus all the radio folks in Radio
Yeah,
Land.
people actually listen on real radios.
I always listen over, terrestrial radio waves.
Real radio.
And
You
leave
have a
it
real
on for
radio
my
in your
pets
house.
too. Shout out to Ranger and Fiona.
Oh, Princess Fiona. She must be so depressed without her dear friend.
He's been coming back to visit.
I forget what relationship they have. Her dad.
Right.
Fiona the cat is Elijah's daughter.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, if I recall. So we're gonna finish the show with a really awesome cover of
Oh.
"Imagine" by Artichoke.
Oh, okay.
I thought, with my shock at how loving and helpful anarchism turned out to be, I thought it'd be nice to play a really loving song about all of us getting along together.
Yeah. Thanks for playing, folks. We'll be back next week.
Yeah. We really appreciate you, and stay tuned for Dan and Patty Sunday Smackdown. It's another kind of talk show, but I'm pretty sure you'll have a good time. All the same. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for supporting your community socialist radio station.
An error has occurred. We have to keep talking.
Oh,
The internet's dying.
right.
All right, guys. See you soon.
Very good. Thanks for playing, folks.
Woo! We appreciate you guys. Joe Pruden shared an article with me on the side, and I didn't have time to read it and
Right,
see
right,
if it
right.
had anything to do with this conversation, but
Right.
I will look it up and send it to you guys.
Okay. Yep.